All right, here we are. Welcome back to Book Wave, the book club podcast. Today we're looking at the book Animal Farm by George Orwell. And my question for you, the viewer, is did you read this one in high school? And if so, did you know it was an allegory for Soviet Russia and communism? And you can let us know in the comments down below or at our website at bookwave.club. And I'm your host, Scott. Today I'm joined by the usual Pat Man and Will. What'd you guys think of this one? How much did you learn about communism?
I wouldn't say that I learned much about communism. Like you said and asked the viewers, I read this one in high school. And so for me, reading it again after 9 years, it was interesting just to compare what I was thinking when I was reading it then versus who I am today reading it now. And just the sort of having that first point and this point now on this timeline of reading Animal Farm, the comparison between those two people reading the book was fun for me. It was a sort of interesting internal conversation with myself as my opinions changed and my intellect developed. And like I knew it was about communism then, but I don't think I really knew what communism was and what the impact of communism was. And so reading it again with this new light was really fun for me.
I was kind of the same way. I didn't know that it was an allegory for communism. I just thought it was just a children's book and learning about the characters themselves and who is going to take control of Animal Farm and the upside and downside of doing so. Learning more about George Orwell later in life, and then going back to reading Animal Farm, I can see why George Orwell was very distasteful towards the Soviet Union. And he himself was a socialist at the time. It was only when he discovered the flaws within the Soviet system, the communist system, that his eyes opened and was like, what the hell is this? Why are they doing it? And examples of that are laid out throughout the book, and he uses simple language to describe it. And one of the things that we can get into is how language can be deceptive, how the commandments are changed without warning, and how Squealer is telling the rest of the animals that it's the way things are, and Napoleon's always right, and yeah, it was very clear after reading that this was indeed a book about how people can use language to deceive or to be honest with people. And I think the attractive route is to just deceive others for a personal agenda.
Before we go too much farther, I do want to distinguish between socialism and communism. Communism being awful and socialism also being awful, but sometimes effective in certain like small doses. I don't know. I still haven't read enough about socialism to be able to say this is why socialism is different from communism and this is why communism is so bad. But when you look at the historical accounts of communism and socialism, it certainly makes you shy away from it. But I don't want to go down that road too far without getting your opinion on reading the book, Scott.
You're gonna get all the Randians after you saying something like that, Will.
The hope is to avoid that. Look, socialism and communism are two different schools of thought, and I don't know enough about socialism to make any comparisons between them.
Yeah, I feel the same way, but it was definitely to more the extreme when I read this when I was in high school, because I didn't like read this for English class or anything. I just read it when I was in my punk rock anti-government anarchist phase, you know. And I just kind of read it as just anti-government in general. It's just like, oh, okay, this guy's telling us that this is how government acts, so I'm against it all entirely. I took a lot away from it when I was in high school, but not really the right kind of stuff.
What did you think of it reading it this time around?
Well, there was a lot of other things that I picked up on, like the differences between capitalism and socialism and how he points out in the book that, capitalism might have been the better route to take. But there was one part that I picked up on that completely went over my head the last couple times I read it. But the flag of Animal Farm is green, and it's got a hoof and a horn on it. And then I thought about that for a minute. I'm like, he actually made the flag look exactly like the Soviet flag with the hammer and sickle, with the opposite color green instead of red.
Yeah, and it's interesting how he infuses many different aspects of Soviet Union into this book. And the best way to start off with that was old Major's speech to the animals in the
Mm-hmm.
in the barn, and how he had a dream where the animals can earn their living and not fall under this idea of serving humanity when they get nothing in return from them.
Yeah, and the fact that there was almost exact parallels of the characters in the book to historical figures in Russian history. Like, you could almost say that old Major was Karl Marx or Tolstoy or something like that. And
I
then
think
the fight
I
between
think
Napoleon and Snowball could have been like that between Stalin and Lenin.
yeah, definitely. I think old Major was meant to represent Lenin, who brought up the idea of this system, and Stalin, of course, was Napoleon, and Snowball was Trotsky.
Okay.
Yeah. I definitely did some spark notes on like the character bios because obviously it's apparent when you're reading it just how much from reality Orwell is drawing on creating these characters. He has a point to make, and he's using history as the canvas that he's painting this point on. And so it made sense for me to do some research into history and into these characters and how they played a role over the past 100, 200 years of human history. Because without that knowledge and without that even desire to seek that knowledge, the book becomes a completely different story.
Yeah, and it would just be something else entirely. Like, it would be just another fairy tale that would probably not get a whole lot of attention. And Animal Farm did have a hard time getting published because of Orwell's language and his style and his way of showing this is how the Soviet Union, and even drawing some parallels of his own life when he was in Spain as a soldier, and just
Mhm.
drawing these comparisons too.
But all of that aside, the book itself was written really well, and it was very engaging and a quick read. Like, this is less than 100 pages. This is something that you could bang out in a Saturday afternoon and completely consume and lap up all of the information about. And it read really well, and I got attached to certain characters, and yeah, like I enjoyed reading it. It was nice to revisit it.
And the prose was interesting because, like I said, he used language, and it's a theme of the book. He uses language of how the animals use it in their own, either their own agenda or just to spread a message. And he conveys it in the way in which Stalin back in the day promised the people that he would liberate them, viva la revolution and all that. But those who questioned him were, they were brought down, really. And so the thing that really disturbed me was how Squealer was sending these messages to the rest of the animals about how things are, such as the messages that the sheep kept on saying, 4 legs good, 4 legs bad, or
Four
2
legs
legs
good.
good, or 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Sorry, I got those things mixed up. And then later on, they would change that speech. And even the case with Benjamin, too. Benjamin thinking that he would be off to this paradise where all the other animals are, but instead he would be sent to the slaughterhouse.
Do you mean Boxer?
Yeah, that was Boxer the horse.
What was that, Boxer?
Benjamin was the old donkey that said,
Oh, I
Yeah.
see.
yeah, it doesn't
Okay.
get, nothing ever gets better or worse, just stays the same.
Right.
I related a lot to Benjamin. Like maybe 2 years ago, I probably would have related more to Boxer,
I
but
was
these
just gonna
days,
bring that up. When I was reading Boxer, it reminded me a lot of you, Will, when we were working in that factory together. I will work
oh
harder.
yeah, that was it, man. I was Boxer, like freaking. Oh, it and that was it. It was I was working in this machine with a bunch of people who didn't work hard, and my solution was the factory system is right, and I will work harder, and I will make more parts, and things will get better. And I did it until I injured my back so much that I couldn't work there anymore. And these days, if I were to go back, I'd probably take on the guise of Benjamin, because quite frankly, it's ridiculous to go into it with that mindset of, if I work harder in a broken system, things will get better. You have to have the
Yeah.
intelligence to see what's going on. But for me, like, if we could talk about characters for a minute, back when I first read it, my memory of reading it, I have in my mind, or ahead, this feeling that Moses played a much bigger role than he actually did in the book. For some reason, Moses, my memory of it was that he was there a lot more frequently than in actuality he was. But the manipulation that the government that they have on the farm has over religion, and has over Moses coming in and doing nothing and receiving all sorts of rewards for just kind of encouraging these people to believe in a happy ending, was interesting.
Yeah, and they mentioned that like some of the animals believed, but most of them just kind of laughed at him and said, "Nah, we don't believe in that kind of stuff here on Animal Farm."
It kind of reminded me of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is a book that I've read this year. And in it, he described himself, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, if anybody's listening who has read this book, but he was in a situation where he was suffering greatly, and then he had a vision of himself walking into a university and lecturing a class, and it was years in the future. And if he kept that vision in his mind while working in the concentration camp, then he would be able to live better and get himself out of that hell. And in a way, Moses giving that kind of vision to the rest of the animals, like if they worked hard enough, they can get to where they want it to be.
And I think that's necessary, and it speaks to Orwell's ability to write, that they would have Moses come in and not be censored from the farm and banned from visiting, because having that little conversation in the background that says, look, there's this happy sugar mountain where everybody can live out their days doing whatever they want, is something to look forward to. And as a sentient being, you need something to look forward to, and something to get away from. And that's where Jones comes in, and that ever looming fear of returning to the rule of Jones, which is contorted and used to ignore the fact that the present is worse than the past.
Definitely. And they did. In fact, they got many rewards from that. The animals did. They've managed to help build the windmill, and they got enough resources they needed until, this whole rivalry with Napoleon and Snowball occurred. And then that's when everything started to go downhill.
I think my biggest focus this time around was on Clover. I'm pretty sure it was Clover. That's the old mare, right? That just kind of noticed things that didn't make sense, but then when she checked in on the commandments, they'd been updated, and she just said, "Oh, I must have been confused." And
That was the one
it
that
was
kept
sad.
asking people to read the. She was the one that kept asking the other animals to read the rules. I'm like, I don't remember this happening. Just a couple examples, like no animal shall wear clothes was one of the commandments, or like no animal shall sleep in a bed, and it was edited to say no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. Like, oh no, we can have beds, just don't use the evil sheets from the man and the clothes.
And I think we see that manipulation of history as a theme that shows up in 1984 as well, that other classic by Orwell. And that seriously manipulative device that drives the economy and the society based on facts that have been played with by the leaders in charge. And it's horrifying to think that history might be altered to better set up our leaders to propel them into the future for their agenda.
Yeah, and that's one
And
of the biggest themes in the whole book, because like the propaganda machine is the strongest machine working in this book. For the pigs, they keep making up stories about Snowball. Everybody knows they're lying, but they just go along with it because Napoleon's always right.
it's all based on language. Language can be and yeah, it's kind of like the terms and conditions. Nobody reads them, but they'll accept it anyway.
Yeah. My favorite part, though, just completely tangential, was the first morning after Napoleon got drunk and thought he was dying and banned animals from drinking alcohol. That was hilarious. Just that little reprieve for humor. Oh my gosh. I'm dying. I'm dying. I'm going to die. I'm dead. Oh wait, I'm hungover.
Yeah.
Never mind. It's okay.
I love how fastly they backtrack on and be like, no, he was never dying. He's stronger now than ever. And oh yeah, the commandment was never to not drink alcohol. You're just don't drink alcohol to excess. Yeah, that's what the rules said.
Yeah, that was really funny. And again, the whole story read really well and it tied in really nice.
What about the ending? What did you all think of that?
I mean, depressing comes to mind, right? Like, obviously, we see the full evolution of the communist government taking the lower class and raising them up to the middle class and banishing the higher class, and then evolving into the higher class that then represses the middle class back into the lower class. Like, it's just ridiculous, right? You cut off the head of the snake and two more heads grow to replace it.
Yeah, that's just like a perfect metaphor for socialism, because they work for equalization. They seize the means of production, and as soon as they get it all, they keep it. They don't redistribute it. It just stays all at the top, and the dominance hierarchy or whatever kind of hierarchy just gets that much more lopsided.
Okay, help me out here. Is that socialism or communism? Because I thought socialism
Well,
does redistribute, but communism keeps it in the control of the state.
well, when has it worked, really?
Well, I just mean on paper.
On paper, it's all based on collectivism.
So are these words interchangeable?
I wouldn't say that, but in some cases, possibly. I don't know. I'm not an
All right.
expert, but
I'm just gonna have to read up on socialism and its differences. You know, I didn't get that out of the Republic. They didn't talk about socialist government.
I also like to go back to one thing about language, and that is the word equal. One of the commandments is all animals are equal. And then later on, it's changed to all animals are equal, but some are better than others, or something on the line.
some are more equal than others.
Some are more equal than others. And it just kept ringing in the back of my head about how abusive that word can be. We say we all want equality, but some cannot handle it, or some cannot earn it because we want power. Therefore, we're going to do the best we can to keep it, go after it, and prevent others from obtaining it. And it's a method that Napoleon and the pigs use audaciously throughout, and it remains one of the most compelling features in the novel, I would say. Novella. It's not a novel, it's a novella.
Well, it's interesting because when you create a system that says all animals or all people are equal, and you have these means of production that are meant to be equally distributed to all of these entities, and you have a majority of entities that actually don't do enough to provide the perpetuation of the provisions, it creates some serious repercussions, I believe, if you have a small minority of people that are actually producing the resources that are meant to be equally distributed for everyone. You're going to get some negative emotions involved when people are working till death to provide for people that won't lift a finger.
Even to point out a problem too, like in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the pigs obviously are the biggest abusers of that. I don't know what you'd call it, the production dichotomy on the farm, but immediately they're drinking the milk and they eventually move into the house, and they take all of the benefits of the farm for themselves instead of distributing that amongst all of the animals when they had literally created the perfect system. All of the animals in the first year, they had the biggest yield in their harvests, and they were creating something that could have been amazing for everyone, but due to greed and feeling as though they deserve more and better because they're supervising the animals, these pigs completely destroy the farm. They sow the seeds of their own destruction.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's a way around that, Like, is it possible for someone to have that much power and not go crazy? Is Marcus Aurelius the only one able to achieve that? Could we live under a philosopher king that was
Well, that's the
benevolent
big
enough and
question.
uncorruptible?
Or does power simply corrupt? Absolutely.
That is a good question.
I think mindfulness is something that has to come into the equation of the philosopher king. I mean, could a philosopher king exist? Would he want to exist? Would he begrudge his existence?
There's so many ideas going on in my head. I just so
But
many
then
answers to that.
it makes you question capitalism when you read a book about another system of government. When you look at the reasons for why I guess Mr. Jones was overthrown was because there was dissatisfaction amongst the people, right? And so you ask yourself, well, where does dissatisfaction come from? And is it necessary? And is there a system that addresses it and reduces the dissatisfaction over the majority? And is change good? Is change better? Do we need to change? It leaves you asking a lot of questions about government and wanting in information.
Yeah. I wonder if there's anything to the story about the lack of, or like the block in communication between the farmer and the animals. If that was kind of like a metaphor that the people, or that the leaders of the Soviet state wouldn't ever listen to the pleas of the people. They just do whatever they thought was best. I wonder
They
if he
never
used
question.
I wonder if he just used the farm setting just to kind of also add on to that the farmer is actually incapable of listening to the people. Maybe that's something else that he was trying to say, that a leader of that many people is actually incapable of listening to all the demands and the cries and the needs of the people. Like, the farmer couldn't possibly know what all of his animals need in the same way that, a king of a country too big to sustain itself.
Well, that's a really good point that you bring up, Scott. But the other thing, too, is that the one thing that he does know that they need, which is food every day, he doesn't address. And there's probably something more buried in that, too, because why isn't he feeding his people? Even though he has the means to, he's not doing the harvest and he's not taking care of these people. Even though he can't hear every single demand, the one demand that rings the loudest, he still doesn't address.
Mm-hmm.
And also some of the animals don't even question Jones, if I remember correctly. They never ask him in a peaceful manner, why are we not given this? But instead they decided to rebel. They decided to follow old Major's and just go along with it.
Yeah, which is a problem that we don't really have with capitalism. Like, you can always, write a letter to your congressman, I guess, right? Or your
Well,
mayor,
just
or
look what's
whatever.
going on. Like, we're in the middle of impeachment trials right now in the States, aren't we?
Yeah, it's never ending. There's always one thing after another.
But it is nice to know that there is a system, the Constitution, that allows the people to keep their leaders in check, theoretically.
Yeah.
Even if it is unjustified screeching.
And fake news.
Oh, we're gonna get canceled after that one.
we jest.
We're just talking about books, okay?
No one's listening this far in anyway.
Well, exactly. If you are here, why don't you head on over to our website, www.bookwave.club, and comment on the post about this podcast and let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, did we have anything else to cover here?
I mean, we didn't talk about the relationship with the pigs and I think Mr. Frederick and Mr. Pilkington and the allusion to Hitler and neighboring Germany, but I don't know how much of that we need to go into because, again, it's a quick read. This is something that you can digest in probably 4, maybe 6 hours if you're a slower reader. You can spread this out over a few days, but you could definitely get this book read within the span of a week, no problem. And it's worth reading. If you haven't read Animal Farm, my goodness, you rare breed, you find a copy, go to your library and check it out. Because I think there's a responsibility on people to educate themselves about all of these systems of government, their flaws, their pitfalls, their windfalls, all of these things, the good and the bad, before we make an informed decision.
Well said.
Definitely.
Until next time, 4 legs good, 2 legs better.